Hello and welcome. Today we have Bach and Böck, or the other way around, and they are going to give a talk called Package Mismanagement. Please give them a hand.
Thanks a lot. My name is Benjamin, and I'm here with my friend Hanno. We met at Bornhack 2 years ago, and we thought it was fun to chat about various vulnerabilities. And at last year's Bornhack, we did some collaboration together, and it was about the Python package management system. Then we talked a little bit more in general about package management or package mismanagement, which is the title of the talk, a bit provocative maybe. About a month after last Bornhack, we had some coverage, and someone called us Bach and Böck. We thought that was a nice name for our team. We're not going to get you a lot of details about our personal lives, so but please visit our websites and so on.
Do you want to take this?
Oh, thanks. Yeah, so this talk was prepared as collaboration during this Bornhack. It's been pleasant to chat with people around the camp about package management. And yesterday we started putting together the slides, and we just finalized them. So let's say that it's a disclaimer, it's a bit spontaneous, everything. We hope there's no terrible mistakes in the slides. We don't claim to come up with all solutions. We have some proposals during the presentation, but we like to just point out some problems, some incidents, and some hypothetical things. Also, this is not some harsh criticism of any individuals, because we know that these open source package management systems are typically run by well-intending volunteers or people with very little resources. So, this is the outline of the talk. First, we'll present some real-life incidents that we've stumbled upon. Then we'll talk a little bit about some theoretical attacks, and finally we'll give our views on where all this is headed. Yeah, all over to you, Hanno.
Yeah. So first we want to talk a bit about PyPy. In case you don't know, PyPy is the Python package manager. So if you ever done pip install something, then you're using PyPy, which according to some statistics we found has 149,000 packages. So quite a lot. So in 2016, someone wrote his thesis about so-called typo squatting. So this was a master thesis, I think, at the University of Hamburg. It's online, so you can read it if you're interested in it. And it basically had 2 attack scenarios on package managers listed. So the first one was you could register standard library names on the package manager and see if someone installs them. So the idea here is, let's say you have URL lib2, which is part of the Python standard library. So you don't have to install it. If you have Python, then you also have URL lib2. But you could still try to register a package for it. And some people who don't know that it's part of the standard library may try to install it over pip. And this was actually quite successful. So the guy who did this thesis, he counted the installations and had almost 4,000 installations in 2 weeks. And the interesting thing here is with PyPy that it always runs an installation script, which means as soon as someone installs your package, you kind of have code execution on his machine. So you don't even have to use it, it's just the installation. There's a new package format that doesn't do it, but it's not mandatory yet. And the other scenario was this classic typo squatting, where you're just trying to use slight variations of a package name, where you hope that people mistype the package name when they install it, and then they install your potentially malicious package. So yeah, that was an interesting thesis. It got quite some coverage, and when they were done with that research, they deleted all the packages that they had registered. That was nice, because then we could register them. So And then, yeah, like I think you started it with a few, and then at some point we did it systematically, and then we did some statistics, how many installations there were. So we had just the installation script would do a simple callback to a web server we control, so we knew how many people installed them. We didn't do anything malicious. We also told people, like when they installed it, I think we just threw an exception and an error message so people knew that they had installed a package which was not a legitimate package. Then in September last year, the Slovakian CERT discovered that there were other packages doing something very similar, except they were kind of obfuscating what they were doing. So the code was sticking together some base64 stuff, and it was trying to. It was code where you saw people didn't want to make code where it's hard to see what it's actually doing, and that was sending what just doing a connection to some Chinese IP. And the assumption was that probably they planned to update it and do something malicious at some point, but it's not entirely clear what the background was. But we can see that there are probably people trying to exploit these things in the wild. So as a reaction to that, PyPy now blocks all standard library names, so they have learned from the previous incident. They did not block all the previously abused typo names, so yesterday we were able to re-register some of the names that were used in their thesis 2 years ago. We will probably tell them at some point, so they block them as well. Yeah. Okay, so PyPy is, of course, not the only package management. NPM got quite a bit of attention for some of these issues. So NPM is the package management from Node.js. So you probably heard about this left pad issue. So at some point, people found malicious packages which were also typo packages, so small variations from popular package names. That were sending the environment variable back to an attacker-controlled server. And the environment variable often contains things like authentication tokens and passwords, so this can be really have severe consequences. There was also a package called getCookie, which contained a backdoor. And it seemed there was a package called mailparser, which hadn't had any updates for several years, and then it had an update that just added this getCookie dependency and nothing else. So it didn't add any new features or anything, just added this backdoor package as a dependency. And this was quite recently, this ESLint incident where 2 packages were replaced by malicious packages that would send the npm configuration file. Again, this contains credentials from developers if you're developing with npm. And it's likely that this was due that the account of the developer was compromised and probably due to password reuse. So you probably know this there. Like you can find dumps from previous hacks, for example, from LinkedIn and MySpace, and where in the past large sites have been hacked and the passwords leaked, and they are out there in the internet. And if you reuse your password, which is in one of those leaks, then other people might find your password. And it seems that's what happened here. Yeah, and now I go over back to Benjamin.
Thanks. So perhaps you could say that NPM is a bit old, maybe the first JavaScript package manager or something, and PyPy is a bit old. So these incidents are perhaps because the platforms are a bit old or something, but there's also new platforms with the same types of issues, and one of them is called Snap. I'm not sure how many people have heard of it yet, but actually it has been in Ubuntu as a default service since 1604. So Snap is kind of both a sandbox and a package manager. So you can use a command called snap and snap install, also snap buy, because it also has proprietary software. And what happens here is that it's also a very open platform, so anyone can contribute with their package, and thus there is the issue of malware. And even though Snap is quite new, the occurrence of malware has perhaps also been snappy. The first example is from I think February this year, at least it's from this year, where some packages had minors in them, and the packages were published as proprietary packages. There were two games. Because it's proprietary software on the Snap platform, that means you cannot even inspect the sources. It was also hard for people to tell like how big the impact was, because there's no install counts available. Of course, it's a new platform, so hopefully they will add the install counts and sources for proprietary software. In the aftermath of this, when this got some attention, perhaps the author also felt great that he was having some attention for himself and his project, and he kind of apologized with a statement that we think is probably legitimately from this author, saying that in reference with my application in the Snappy Store, I wanted to explain that it was my way of monetizing the software. Yes, it's probably a way of monetizing software, but he can see that it's not really the way to go. But he offers his help to secure the platform, and he also says that it's not Canonical's fault, because actually this is a problem of having proprietary software on the platform. What happened after that was that the Snap maintainers actually edited the proprietary software, has somehow removed the malware, the minor, and published a new version without the minor, and then people would automatically have upgraded that package. It wasn't actually removed; it's still there, I think. And another curious example that we stumbled over with Snap and like finding out who's actually publishing to Snap is this common thread on GitHub. Amazon Web Services CLI is available for Snap, so I think you do snap install AWS CLI, and someone did that and there was a bug, so they went to GitHub and said there's a bug. And the first comment is from a famous guy from Python environment, Donald Stuft. He seems to be everywhere. He says that he's not really sure where that Snap package is actually coming from. So he can't really help with the issue. Then the next comment is from someone who says that it seems that the developer is maybe Amazon Web Services, or maybe it's Canonical themselves, because it also seems to display that it's Canonical, and they have made a blog post or a post somewhere that implies that they made the package. And then finally someone finds out that it's not Canonical, but it's the Amazon Web team who published that package. It's probably better. It can probably improve at this point. We also have a couple of other honorable mentions in the regard of NPM. They managed to break production servers, and they did that by changing irreversibly changing file system ownerships in an automated NPM upgrade, and this GitHub issue referenced this very, very long story. Yawn, which is supposedly fixing some of the issues, it was made in 2016 by Facebook, fixing some of the security issues with NPM, has had an open issue for 2 years about not having a security model, which is quite interesting, because if you go to the front page of the Yawn project, and there's a giant jumbotron that says that it's secure, but we have kind of scrambled to find out what it means. For browser extensions, of course, there's a lot of open source and it's also kind of package management. We've seen also it's the impact is vast here. Ad blockers especially have been a popular target, maybe because of the naming confusion between Adblock Plus, uBlock, Origin, and so on. By digging into this other ad blocker has done some research and first in April they made a discovery that more than 20 million people had malicious ad blockers that was in the Chrome store. Then they went on recently to expose something called Big Star Labs, where in total on browsers and mobile apps they found more than 11 million people infected. And infected in this case means that these ad blockers, they are sending browser history. Each and every address that is visited are being sent to another website. It is both two ad blockers and then a mouse gesture extension that is for Chrome and Firefox, indeed. Yeah.
Yeah, there was one case where there was a famous Chrome add-on, Add to Feedly, and the developer got an offer from someone that if he wants to sell his extension, and he actually did for a few $1,000s. And then a new version of this extension showed up in the Chrome extension store, which didn't have any new features or anything changed. It just injected ads into web pages. So yeah, it's also a business model, of course, if you have a popular tool, which is in some kind of package management, you can sell it to someone who is doing shady things with it. I think this was yours again.
Yeah, we thought also a bit about software distribution in general, and I know that this is not necessarily considered package management, but it's a very popular pattern, and you find that some of the package managers like NPM and also the Ruby version manager are dependent on bootstrapping their installations from such patterns here. So basically the pattern is that you curl, you download some script, and then you pipe it directly into sudo bash. And interesting case here is that, of course, this is widely spread on support sites where instructions are being kept short. And the author here both have editing rights to his or her own post, but of course also to the script published. So verifying this once is not enough because it can be edited at any given time. So think about that also. Yeah.
Okay. We have a few hypothetical attacks which we don't know if they happened yet, but which could happen. Like we had this buying a browser extension, but of course you could also imagine that the developer of a famous package on one of these programming language package managements like PyPy or NPM could sell his extension to someone who will then, I don't know, add a crypto miner or build a botnet or whatever. There are many business models in this space. It's definitely a plausible scenario. Like particularly if you think many of these even very popular packages are developed by single persons and often without them being paid. Then there was a blog post where someone was like playing a scenario what he could have done. He thought like, okay, I could build I could build a package which provides some functionality, and then I could ask other packages if they don't want to add that functionality and add me as a dependency. So I send them a pull request which adds a new feature, and then I get pulled in as a dependency. So by that, making your own package more popular and get it more installations, and then at some point let it turn bad and yeah, same thing. You can install crypto miners or backdoors, whatever, and build up a botnet.
Yeah, and in this case, he was suggesting to make a log coloring module. So every package, of course, has logging, and why shouldn't it have beautiful colors in the logs?
Yeah, I mean, that's very important, of course. Yeah. So we have a variety of problems here, and as we already said earlier, we don't claim to have a perfect solution for that. So with many of these package managers, we have no moderation. So everyone can sign up on PyPy and register any package name. Then we may have developers who have bad security practice. Just because someone is developing a popular package doesn't mean he is using two-factor authentication, or doesn't mean he doesn't have a compromised laptop, or I don't know, let his laptop stand around at Bornhack or whatever. Then developers may turn bad, like getting sold or collaborating with bad actors. We had this example with the Chrome extension, and yeah. And also, in some cases, we saw we have insufficient handling of incidents after they happened, like with PyPy, that they, I think that was a big failure, that they failed to block these packages that had been abused in the past, even if it was only abused for research purposes. Yeah, and many of these things are difficult problems, so it's not always obvious what a good solution would be. A fundamental issue here is the issue of moderation, I think. So you have, like, on the one side things like, which we call the Debian model, because, like, if you want to have a package in Debian, there's only a closed group of developers who can add them, and it's not trivial to become a developer. So if you want to become a developer, you kind of have to be part of the community, and some people know you, and there's some kind of process involved. Which has the advantage that it's much less likely that you get malware into this package management. But of course, it also has a big disadvantage, and that is that things often move very slowly. Getting a package into Debian can be a lot of hassle because you need to find a developer who is willing to pick it up. So the model that PyPy and NPM and many of these other package managers have, it's much more agile. Its development happens just much faster, because it's just such a low barrier. You can just publish your software there, which is in a sense also a good thing, right? So we have kind of this open and riskier model, and we think it's quite unlikely that a project like PyPy would switch to a moderated model, because that would just hinder the way development happens in that community so much. There are some partial workarounds. Of course, you can act in hindsight. Like, if, as we had earlier, if you know that a package has been abused, then you should not delete that package name and make it free again. You should somehow block it and prevent these things from happening again. Or you could imagine some kind of opt-in feature for security where you're only installing certain packages. One thing we could imagine as a kind of a middle ground would be that you say, okay, we have an installation where some packages get you can just install with the package manager, and these are packages from known maintainers. They have some popularity, there's some kind of vetting. And then if you want to install a package that just someone has uploaded, then there's an additional, maybe the installer asks, yeah, this is not one of the approved packages, do you still want to install it? That could be some kind of middle ground for these projects. Yeah.
Thanks. So yeah, that super general question then is, if we're moving in a bad direction, I mean, not us in here perhaps, but more those when we consider the numbers of 20 million users affected by something in the Google Store, or 700,000 packages on NPM, and a lot of dependencies flying around, and it's a bit chaotic. So by eroding, we mean, does this mean that people are getting resistant towards good security practices and starting to accept more things that are bad? What's actually happening with the Snap and Flatpak platforms? Are they going to take over from the moderated model? Because we can already see what's going on with Ubuntu and how Canonical will get into that now. And then, of course, also we know from before that the PPAs became really popular. We can also see...
So PPAs are on Ubuntu in official package editions.
Yeah. It's something that has happened many years ago, and I haven't actually dug out an example of malware on a PPA, so at least fingers crossed that things can go the right way. The last one also quite interesting, because it's in principle you can say a lot of things about where you download software from, or whether this is the same as just going to a website and downloading a package. But it also seems a little bit further down the slippery slope, because now we are just having people copy-paste commands into their command line. And of course, if someone owns fancy.io and they make a subdomain install fancy.io, then perhaps they don't have the install fancy.io domain without the dot, and so on. So there's a lot of potential of manipulating with these install instructions and just posting them in other places. So the direction of Snap is a good question at this point, I think. But some of the issues are definitely worth putting focus on, shedding some light on. Firstly, it's hard to find sources for these Snap packages. There's no Snap source command, and I cannot find a link to the sources on the official detail view of packages on snapcraft.io where they're published. And of course, they also allow proprietary packages, which means that you just have to set a flag in your package, and whoop, it doesn't require a source anymore. Then, because we also like the goal of build reproduction, the Snap packages are run only in Canonical's CI system, and we don't see if this is really headed towards being reproducible on other platforms. It's also, as I showed in the GitHub comment thread there, it is a bit hard to assert anything about the publisher. Firstly, there's the issue that you can just put some other publisher's name, and maybe no one really verifies that, but also that the infrastructure for asserting these signatures that are present in the Snap packages have actually not been implemented yet. So that's a manual procedure. And again, the issue that anyone can add a package. So anyone can sort of pretend to be someone and add a package at this stage. It can also be a good thing that the CI is run by Canonical, because in the case of Flatpak, there's a lot of remote Flatpak sources that you can just add to Flatpak, and that kind of spreads out the confusion a little bit. So if people get used to use Flatpak, that could also imply that they get used to just trusting any sort of package source. In this case, you just have to trust Canonical. But they're pushing Snap, and so it's been a default daemon even in Ubuntu server, I think, from 1604. And in 1804, they started to introduce a couple of snaps in the default Ubuntu installation. One of them is GNOME Calculator. As you may know, GNOME Calculator is already a Debian package. So you can actually snap remove GNOME Calculator, and then apt-get uninstall Snap, and then just apt-get install GNOME Calculator again. And then you're back to the same system, but without Snap. So that's a bit funny. And you can do a search on the official Twitter account for Ubuntu, and you'll see that they are pushing Snap quite often. I counted in August, they made 11 updates advertising software that you could Snap install. So it's almost a daily thing that they push a new snap package. For instance, snap install Ponysay. Yeah, so this is the kind of tweet that we see quite often.
Oh. So we said earlier that kind of the more secure model compared to these package managers with an open model is kind of the Debian model, where we have a group of developers and it's kind of moderated. But some people have been asking questions in the past couple of years if this model is even good enough, because like we're kind of assuming that the developers are honest people, that their machines are not compromised, and also that the Debian servers are not compromised, that we can trust them, or also they download their packets over HTTP, but yeah. So there has been this effort of doing reproducible builds where you say there should be a defined way how you get from the source code to the binary, so that other people can verify that actually if you take the source code you get to the same binary. Because without that it's relatively easy for a developer to say, okay, he can add a backdoor to a package, and that can also be quite hidden, like where it's only some bit flipped somewhere that enables some vulnerability, and that would be very hard to detect. But even though this reproducible builds efforts has been going on for many years now, we're still quite far away from having some kind of reproducibility by default. And I think like Debian is not even close to discussing that, to making this a requirement. Then there's also the worrying thing that like we currently have no way of having kind of an auditing the history of packages published. So there has been the idea floating around of having something which people call binary transparency, where you would say all the packages that are published, we store them in some kind of append-only cryptographic structure. Some people call that sometimes a blockchain, but yeah. So the idea there is that you cannot just unrelease a package, because right now if the maintainers of Debian want, they could just delete a package from the server and then later claim, yeah, this was never there. And if it contains a backdoor, it's very hard to figure out where did it come from. Did someone compromise the server, or was this a developer? So the idea here would be, yeah, you should not be able to unrelease a package without leaving some kind of trail that later on, if an incident is investigated, people can find out about. But basically no one is doing this right now.
And for the platforms, of course, that means that they just have to have a feature so that the package is no longer installable, but it's still available for auditing.
Yeah. So some things we think that are good things that package managers should do, of course, block package names that have been previously abused. So it shouldn't be that what we had earlier, that someone abused something, then it gets deleted and then the next person can abuse it. Particularly like with typos from popular packages, just try to block them if you know about them. You should use HTTPS, which, I mean, it's not perfect, but it's some kind of baseline security. And like, for example, still, if you download Ubuntu these days, it still gets downloaded just over HTTP, so it can be trivially a man in the middle. We generally think you should not delete or unpublish any old versions, even though if they have security vulnerabilities or even if they are malware. We think they should still be available for analysis. You can maybe have, as Benjamin just said, you may want to have a feature when you know a package is bad that you can no longer install it, but we think it should still be somehow available on your website. And a bad example here, I recently figured out that Signal, they just delete their old Linux releases. So you can only download the most current release, and the older ones are just not available anywhere. And I think that's a very bad practice. And then one thing you could do, which is relatively simple, you could store the hashes of your releases in some kind of verifiable structure. And you probably already have a verifiable structure if you're any kind of software project, because Git is kind of like an append-only lock, because it always the top hash of Git is always a hash that covers all the previous history of your package. So that's a very simple thing where you can add some kind of audit trail to your release process.
Yeah. And there's also something that we can do, even though we're not necessarily building the package management systems, but as a community to help shape the direction. And as I mentioned, I can't say a lot about Snap because it's a bit hard to find the information needed to understand the security. I think the community needs more understanding of platforms like Snap and Flatpak, and also to understand where they're headed, and in terms of how much software is going to be installed in the near future using these platforms. And pen testing, it seems when people scratch around with to look for malicious stuff on especially the open platforms, they're actually quite successful. So do that, or if you are at a university and need a good assignment, there's also some good thesis, like the one we started out with was a bachelor thesis, showing something very important. Then you can also do some friendly name squatting and typo squatting, since if you are using a package manager and you find that you make some typo, and you luckily don't get infected by malware, then maybe hurry up and just make an empty package that creates an exception when it's being installed. That's about enough to block it. Another good thing you can do is to make it easy for the owners of the package platform to clean up if they need to do that and they want to implement a feature to guard against it. Every time you see some bad practices, perhaps call them out, like the sudo curl bash curl sudo blah. Is there an alternative to this? Tell people that there is an alternative. And then also help the good package managers, perhaps good old Debian, to distribute packages faster, because that is one of the reasons why the non-moderated package managers are picking up pace so fast. Yeah, this is our final slide.
Yeah.
And,
so now we're open for questions and discussion.
Over there.
I totally agree that this is a mess, but do you have any indication that there's collaboration between different languages like Python, Ruby, whatever, to have some sort of a common format for their updates, or even some kind of collaboration between Debian and RPM people to have a unified format for downloads? Because this is just balkanized beyond reason.
There is the update framework, which is a cross-platform idea of what the package managers should do, and it lists out a great number of types of attacks. And it's fair to say now that actually PyPy has an approved PEP. That's how they inform the future direction of the Python system, and they are making improvements to PyPy according to the update framework, and the update framework is a really good resource. I've just been introduced to it, so I'm no expert.
But it's still like it's only kind of a framework. There's, as far as I know, no effort to try to unify all these package managements into some kind of common thing. So I guess that's the situation we are in right now, that every community is building their own thing. I don't like it either, but I have my doubts whether that can be changed.
More questions? Then let's give a big round of applause for Bach and Böck.